16, 17 or 18 inch wheels. What's going to give us the best performance for a winter tyre? To find out, I've once again teamed up with Goodyear. We're using the Goodyear Ultra Grip Performance Gen 1 winter tyre in a 205/55/16, a 225/45/17 and a 225/40/18. This gives us a bit more interesting than just wheel size alone because we're actually changing the width of the tyre. One of the theories about winter tyre is narrower is better because it allows the tyre to push through the snow and ice and get to the surface below. So we're going to find out whether fitting a narrower winter tyre is better in snow. Is it going to hurt us in the wet and dry? Is the wider tyre really going to struggle, or is it just going to be all much for much? So let's go testing in the snow and ice. Okay, so I'm now in Finland at Goodyear's incredible Arctic test facility. It's an Evolo which is very North Finland. It's inside the Arctic Circle and the facility is incredible. They have a massive snow flat, an ice flat, ice handling, 2 snow handling circuits, a snow circle and snow hills for incline and decline. Today I will be doing 3 simple tests of these 16, 17 and 18 inch winter tyres. We're going to do snow handling and I'll look at objective timing, which is just raw time, and subjective balance, which is how the car feels and behaves at the limit. We'll look at acceleration and traction testing, which is simply accelerating from 5 kilometers an hour up to 30 kilometers an hour and being measured. And then we'll look at braking, which is decelerating from 50 kilometers an hour to 5 kilometers an hour and measuring the distances. This will give us a good overview of how each of the 3 tyre sizes perform in snow and whether there's one clear advantage, whether the 16 inch, the narrower 16 inch 205 section tyre has an advantage because it's narrower and can press into the snow more, or whether the wider 17 inch and 18 inch at 225 have an advantage because there's more sipes. So it'll be a very interesting test to see which has the advantage, if any.
As you can see, the objective differences between the 3 wheel sizes are tiny. Fortunately, the subjective differences are more interesting.
I think subjectively for snow handling, the 17 was the best all-round tyre. The 16 inch might have been fastest, but it had a very oversteery behaviour. Now the oversteer behaviour helps me get around the lap. I like a car to have an oversteer balance, and when you're running a car with traction control, a little bit of oversteer really helps you just keep speed to the corner. That's not so great on the road. The 18 inch was equally as quick as the 17 inch, 0.1% between it, but it just, while it was quicker to steer, it just felt a little bit like sudden when it broke into understeer and the balance wasn't quite there, so I didn't quite like it quite as much as the 17. The 17 was just lovely. It was such a nice balanced tyre. It's definitely the one I would choose for snow handling, but the objective data show it's very small, and in the UK when it snows you're probably not going to be going out doing a rallycross stage. So again, like the objective differences, the subjective differences shouldn't be lent on for a tyre choice. It's all very similar when it comes to sort of outright safety. The biggest take home here is the differences between a good winter tyre and a bad winter tyre in the snow are far greater than the differences between a 16, 17 and 18 inch winter tyre. So hopefully moving on to the next testing, which is at Miraval in the south of France, Goodyear's other test facility in Europe, things will be a little bit more different between the tests. Otherwise, the conclusion from this 16, 17, 18 inch winter tyre test will be they're all pretty much the same, just buy a good winter tyre like this Ultra Grip Performance Gen 1. So hopefully, let's go to France and see what the differences are. Okay, so now we've found out that the 16 inch has a slight advantage in the snow. Will that continue over into the wet? The answer is yes and no. Aquaplaning naturally prefers a narrower, high sidewall tyre, which means the 16 inch is best during the aquaplaning testing. The 17 inch is about 6.3% behind it, and then the 18 inch is another 4.3% behind the 17 inch, which is a little bit confusing because the 17 and 18 inch have the same width, but then you also look at how the tread pattern moves as it's compressing into the road and how much water it can evacuate, and a sidewall height or a higher sidewall, which the 17 has, helps with that. During wet braking, it was all very close, like incredibly close. The 18 inch was the worst, but we're talking 1% in it, which is almost a variance you allow in a test. the 17 and 16 inches were pretty much identical, so there's no real reason to pick one tyre over the other just on wet braking performance. They're all as safe as each other. During wet handling, the gap got a little bit bigger, but not a huge amount objectively. The 17 and 18 inches were almost identical, like sort of 0.5% apart, and the 16 inch was 2% behind. And where the 16 inch really lost out was subjectively. It felt a lot softer, it understeered a lot more, you just didn't trust the front end of the car. Where the 18 inch was the most darty into the corners and probably felt the most summer tyre like, although it still didn't feel like a summer tyre, it was the one you would probably want to fit to a sports car for kind of handling reasons. The 17 and 16 inch, the 17 inch was a little bit softer on turning in mid-corner, and then the 16 inch was a bigger step than the step between the 18 and 17 inch. So if you're driving a sporty car and you want to do some wet handling laps, the 18 inch is the preference, and that's no surprise if you'd seen the other 17 versus 18 versus 19 inch summer tyre video. Moving on to the dry testing, dry braking again reversed the situation. In the dry, the 17 and 18 inch were the best tyres for braking, about 2% ahead of the 16 inch, and this is kind of what you'd expect because the wider tyre, more rubber in contact with the road, that gives more grip. The dry braking trend continued onto the track as well. Now, you'd be a bit of an idiot if you were going to take a winter tyre onto a track day, but it does show you how the tyres will behave and perform where if you had to maybe perform an emergency manoeuvre while wearing your winter tyres in the dry. The trend was the 18 and 17 were both again very close objectively, and the 16 was about 2% behind. The 18 inch had again the best steering response. It turned in really nicely and kind of felt, as I said in the wet, it felt the most summer-like. The 17 and 16, so the 17 just kind of felt a little bit vague mid-corner, like the turning was a little bit softer and we added a little bit of understeer to the car, and then again when we fitted the 16 inch we added even more understeer and you could really feel the car rolling onto the sidewall. Now, one of the advantages you get from a tyre like the 16 inch, which doesn't feel so good subjectively, is an increase in NVH, and I think for a winter tyre, especially when you think about the UK roads being pretty nasty in the winter with potholes and dirt and everything on the roads, I think comfort's a very important factor to think about, and in this, the 16 inch one. To test it, we thought we'd do real world tests, so we took out a decibel meter, we went over some rough roads, we went over some smooth roads, and there was 3 of us in the car, the cameraman and a test engineer from Goodyear, and we were just grading the tyres subjectively and objectively with the decibel meter to see which tyre we felt offered the best comfort levels. The 16 had a huge advantage here. We all agreed unanimously the 16 was the quietest on test. It was by far the nicest over the really rough surfaces, and while on the roads, while on the quick stuff, while it did give you a little bit of tread noise, it wasn't as bad as the 17 and 18 inch. The 17 and 18 inches were a step behind the 16 inch and they were a lot closer. Now, I felt as the driver, I thought the 17 inch rounded off the edges to the bumps and crashes on the road a little bit better, but it was maybe slightly noisier. The 18 inch surprisingly was quieter than the 17 inch. In the back, the cameraman thought the 18 inch was quite a lot more comfortable than the 17 inch, which I didn't feel in the front. And I think it's because the 18 inch was a little bit sharper over the bumps. So I think for potholes, the 17 is better than the 18. So for big crashes, because you've got a bit more tyre wall deflection, but the general filtering out the roughness of a road, it was so close between the 17 and 18 inch, it was hard to call. But there's certainly something to be said that if you want the most comfortable ride across the winter, go for the smaller wheel size, because that's where the 16 inch had like a massive advantage. The narrower 16 inch was a little bit better in the snow, but it wasn't a huge amount. It was about 1% overall. The 17 and 18 inch were very similar in the snow and ice, objectively, but again, had that kind of like the 18 inch steered quicker, and it was a little bit more positive to drive, so a little bit more sporty. When it moved back to wet and dry, the balance of performance reversed. The 18 and 17 inch were remarkably close, and the 16 inch was about 2% behind in braking and handling. Probably the biggest difference came from subjectiveness and the handling and NVH of the tyres. And I think it really falls down to whether you're looking for a more sporty winter tyre or more comfort orientated, to kind of avoid the generic potholes we get in the UK. If you want a nice comfortable winter ride and you're going to swap your wheels, your nice wheels, and put them away for the winter so they don't get ruined by salt, I'd probably move down to a 16-inch because the difference between like an 18, 17 and 16-inch objectively isn't huge, but the comfort levels were improved and you're going to crash and damage your car a lot less. The 18 and 17-inch were better options should you maybe drive a more sporty car or you want to retain some sort of steering feel or dynamic behavior. But again, it wasn't like a huge amount in objective improvement against the 16-inch, so it was all very close. I think the biggest conclusion from this is, as I've concluded before, picking the right tyre for the car, so the right winter tyre, will give you a much bigger improvement. The difference between a premium winter tyre like this Ultra Grip Performance Gen 1 and a mid-range or a budget winter tyre is way more than 1 or 2%. It's in the 10s and 15s and maybe even to 20s%, especially when you're looking at wet performance as it gets warmer. So the conclusion is, if you're looking for comfort, fit the 16. If you've got a sporty car, fit a bigger size like the 18. If you've got a car with 17-inch wheels on and you don't want to store your wheels, just buy a 17-inch winter tyre because it's going to give you just as much benefit as the 16 or 18-inch. The big thing is fit that winter tyre because that's going to give you the safest motoring in inclement weather. Once again, a huge thank you to Goodyear Dunlop for allowing me to use their excellent winter tyres and their test facilities in France and Finland. Without them, this test just wouldn't have been possible. So a huge thank you to Goodyear again. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Every sort of interaction really helps me and it helps build the channel. It's something I'm really passionate about, tyre information. Any questions, please feel free to ask below. I will answer every question I possibly can personally, and I normally do it fairly quickly because I have no life outside of tyres. Once again, thanks for watching. Big thank you to Goodyear Dunlop, and happy safe motoring.